Colin Howell was born in Portadown, Northern Ireland, on March 14, 1959. Beyond this, little is known about his childhood. The next recorded event is his enrollment as a student at Queen's University in Belfast, where he aspired to earn a degree in dentistry. There he met a nursing student named Leslie Ann Elizabeth Clark, originally from the English town of Plymouth. Leslie had a brother, Christopher Parker, affectionately known as Chris, who worked as an anesthesiologist. Her friends and acquaintances regarded her as a beautiful and cultured woman, both in appearance and demeanor, as well as in her words and thoughts. She was full of life and ambition. The two began a romantic relationship in 1981, and on July 16, 1983, after graduating from their respective programs, they got married. However, the path to marriage was not without its challenges, as it was marked by 3 voluntary terminations of pregnancies. They made this choice out of fear that their intimate relations prior to marriage would be discovered, a stigma deeply rooted in their Baptist beliefs. It appears that Colin favored concealment over strict adherence to these principles. In fact, parallel to his relationship with Leslie, Colin was involved in an affair with a woman from Queen's College where he worked. Shortly after their marriage, the couple moved to Coleraine, a town in the northern part of the country, where they settled on Nell Park Street in a quiet suburban area west of the Bang River, which was ideal for raising a family. There they had and raised 4 children: Matthew, Lauren, Daniel, and Jonathan. Colin worked as a dentist, building a successful practice and earning a solid reputation. Personally, he was friendly and charismatic, also demonstrating a deep commitment to his faith as a devout Christian who regularly attended the local Baptist church, as did his wife. Their children attended the church's daycare center, where a young woman named Hazel Buchanan worked as an assistant. Born Hazel Elkin on March 1, 1963, she was the daughter of farmers. At 18, she married Trevor Andrew Buchanan, who was 22 at the time, at the Omagh Baptist Church. Trevor served as a constable in the Royal Ulster Constabulary, the police force in Northern Ireland. Shortly after their marriage, they welcomed 2 children, Lisa and David. They lived in Coleraine in 1986, settling in Charnwood Park, east of the river. It appeared that Colin's earthly desires often eclipsed the devotion and values he publicly espoused. He began a new extramarital affair, this time with Hazel, 4 years after their initial meeting during swimming lessons for children and adults organized by the church. With their children in tow, they struck up a conversation, and that summer, their affair blossomed, resulting in Hazel's pregnancy. Sure of the baby's paternity, she chose to terminate the pregnancy, traveling to England with Colin for the procedure. Afterward, they ended their relationship but continued to meet clandestinely in the forests of Castle Rock. However, their secret rendezvous were soon discovered by a church member. Consequently, the couple was confronted by Pastor John Hansford when the truth could no longer be concealed. Unable to hide the reality any longer, both Colin and Hazel confessed their affair to their respective spouses. In a bid to repair the damage, they agreed to attend couples counseling sessions for 4 months and adhere to a strict moral regimen. Despite the challenging circumstances, there were indications that the revelation of the truth, coupled with their resolve not to repeat their mistakes, helped the wounds begin to heal. Even Trevor's father, as well as Hazel's father-in-law, forgave him for his deception when Leslie learned the truth. Upon discovering her husband's infidelity, Leslie descended into a profound depression, which was exacerbated by an unexpected tragedy. On May 7, 1991, her father, Harry Clark, died suddenly while visiting her. At that time, Leslie had just welcomed her 4th child with Colin, and the weight of these events became overwhelming. In a moment of despair, she overdosed on medication, leaving behind a letter as her final message. Fortunately, the mother of 4 survived, although she had been taking medication to alleviate her emotional pain. Colin displayed a rather liberal attitude towards the use of painkillers and sleeping pills. On one occasion during a dinner at their home, Leslie's brother Chris noticed that she appeared intoxicated after only 2 or 3 glasses of wine. Colin explained that in addition to the alcohol, he had given her several doses of medication. So it seemed that Leslie was also using alcohol problematically, to the point of losing consciousness. On one occasion, Colin found her lying on the floor, wine spilled around her, while their son Daniel witnessed the scene. The dentist later recounted that it was at that moment he realized he was the one who had caused her immense pain through his affair. A fatal pact was sealed on May 18, 1991, when the couple hosted a birthday party for their 2-year-old son, Johnny. The following morning, Colin contacted one of the elders at Jim Flanagan Baptist Church to report Leslie missing. He insisted that they search at Cliff Terrace in Castorrock, a town near the mouth of the River B, where Leslie's father had owned a house before his passing. Two parishioners, one of whom was a police officer, went to investigate and discovered Leslie in the parking lot of the property, slumped in the backseat of a car. To their shock, they found Trevor Buchanan in the driver's seat. The garage was filled with gas from the car's exhaust, which was being funneled through a vacuum cleaner hose into the vehicle. Both individuals were lifeless at the time. Leslie was 31 years old, and Trevor was 32. The cause of death confirmed the implications of the scene. Both had succumbed to carbon monoxide poisoning. Post-mortem photographs revealed that Trevor had carbon monoxide in his mouth and nose, along with blood oozing from the back of his head. Colin recounted that the night before, Trevor had visited his home for a drink, which led to an argument. The following morning, upon waking, he discovered that his wife was missing and had left a letter. It was at that moment he contacted the church authorities to report her disappearance. However, there were discrepancies between Colin's account of his wife's movements on the day of her death and what other witnesses reported. Despite this, police investigators dismissed these inconsistencies and largely accepted the testimonies of both Colin and Hazel, the partners of the deceased. So while speaking to the dentist, officers observed blood on his shirt but did not investigate this further. They also ignored a witness's statement claiming that a month prior to Leslie's death, she had put a live wire in the bathtub while she was in it. The investigators were convinced this was a typical case of a suicide pact. This conclusion was confirmed by the inquest and officially recorded in a coroner's ruling in 1992. Colin was the one who informed Chris about his sister's death, delivering the news in a controlled and unemotional tone, as was his habit. After becoming a widower, the dentist maintained a formal relationship with Leslie's relatives, but over time he began to distance himself from them. By the late 1990s, there was no further contact between the two families following the tragic deaths of Leslie and Trevor. The boys quickly became good friends, and Hazel even went shopping with Lauren, one of Colin's daughters. The couples enjoyed trips together with their families to Newcastle County Down and the Lake District in England. In 1995, Colin proposed marriage to Hazel, and she accepted, envisioning a new life together in Scotland. They visited Scotland to explore two dental offices, but upon returning to Ireland, they ultimately severed their relationship for good and ceased seeing each other. After his breakup with Hazel, Colin met an American woman named Keela Jorgensen from New York, while both attended a Bible study course. Kyle, a divorcee, had relocated to Northern Ireland with her two children, fleeing her abusive ex-husband. Initially, she lived in Stewart and studied Irish at Ulster University. Colin and Kyle married just 5 months after their first meeting in May 1997 and settled into a house in Castle Rock. Over the course of their 12-year marriage, they welcomed 5 children together. However, their lives were not without difficulties. Colin's dental business faced decline, prompting him to invest hundreds of thousands of pounds in a dubious mining operation in the Philippines, which claimed to have discovered the mythical war treasures of the Japanese Imperial Army. Ultimately, he received nothing more than worthless trinkets from the venture. Upon traveling to the Southeast Asian country, Colin discovered that the treasure was entirely fictitious, leading to a complete loss of his investment, including funds from his children's educational reserve. In May 2007, a new tragedy struck Colin's life when his eldest son died after falling from a 4th-floor staircase in St. Petersburg, Russia, while studying as an exchange student at St. Andrews University in Scotland. At the funeral home, Colin leaped over the coffin, cradling Matthew's body in his arms, and cried out in anguish, questioning why his son had done this and why he hadn't come to him for help. These circumstances intensified the latent tensions between Colin and Kyle. By the end of 2008, Kyle decided to kick Colin out of the house. Although he returned later, a fresh argument erupted in January when she confronted him in the kitchen. The critical situation extended beyond a simple divorce and was not solely about the loss of their child or Colin's poor financial decisions. Instead, it revealed deeper issues in their relationship. What transpired after that last kitchen argument in early 2009 transcended Colin's second marriage, shedding light on the tragic end of his first one and adding a new twist to their ongoing saga. The reality was that the couple's relationship had been constructed on a minefield, maintained over the years in an inexplicable manner. In January 2009, a man appeared at the Castle Rock police station. He was no ordinary whistleblower. He was there to confess to a crime he had committed. He was about to confess to a crime committed nearly 20 years ago, a crime involving the tragic deaths of two individuals. The name of the complainant and alleged perpetrator was none other than Colin Howell. His unexpected confession, so many years later, unveiled a perspective that had remained completely hidden since 1991 regarding the deaths of Leslie and Trevor. What was previously understood as a suicide pact was now revealed to be the product of a meticulous plan, one that was not executed by Colin alone, but was in collaboration with Hazel, his lover at the time. The genesis of this sinister plan began when the unfaithful couple disclosed the truth of their affair to their respective partners. Colin, in particular, concocted the idea one night when Leslie expressed her desire to end her own life. He perceived it as an act of mercy to alleviate her suffering, and he even believed that by releasing his wife from her torment, God would forgive him for his sinful infidelity. According to his revelations, he and Hazel met at least twice to strategize and prepare for the horrific act. During one of these meetings, Colin, the mastermind and primary executor of the operation, provided Hazel with sedatives to administer to Trevor on the night of the planned attack, which was scheduled for May 18th, following their daughter's birthday. Colin first ensured that Leslie fell into a deep sleep on the living room couch. He then cut a baby bottle in half, connecting a tube from his car's exhaust pipe to a hose, which he directed toward her face before igniting the vehicle. As smoke began to fill the room, Colin remained beside her, intending to prevent her from waking. Unfortunately for him, the strong odor did indeed rouse Leslie, and upon seeing her husband in the living room, she cried out for help to her 6-year-old son. Matthew was in his room with his siblings, Lauren, aged 4, and Daniel and Johnny, aged 2 and 9 months, respectively. Matthew heard his mother's desperate scream, a haunting memory that Colin later admitted had always plagued his and a contributing factor to his own suicide. Before Leslie could continue her cries for help or escape, Colin activated his Plan B. He took the comforter under which Leslie was huddled and covered her head, gripping it tightly with his right hand. The hose was positioned between her and the blanket, leaving her no chance of escape. As she inhaled the toxic gas in high concentrations, Colin maintained his grip until she could no longer resist. Colin maintained his grip until he could no longer resist. He then went to the phone and dialed Hazel's number. When she answered, he informed her that he was finished with Leslie and asked if everything was ready, letting her know he was on his way. Afterward, he checked on his children to confirm they were still asleep. Satisfied with their slumber, Colin dressed Leslie in clothes for going out and, under cover of night, dragged her body to the car, placing her in the trunk. To further conceal his terrible burden, he covered her with a blanket and placed a bicycle on top before closing the lid. He then removed the hose he had attached to the exhaust and drove off. Colin headed to Charwood Park, the street where Hazel and Trevor resided. Hazel opened the garage door for him, allowing him to drive in and show her the sheet covering the trunk. When she asked if Leslie was inside, he confirmed it. Colin connected the hose to the exhaust pipe and extended it into the room where Trevor was sleeping. Unbeknownst to Trevor, Hazel had previously convinced him to take a sleeping pill, so he didn't react initially when Colin slipped the hose between him and the duvet. However, unlike Leslie, Trevor did not remain asleep for long and offered fierce resistance. The two men engaged in a violent struggle, falling to the floor. Colin managed to immobilize Trevor's arms with the duvet, stretching it over his head and trapping him with the hose. He held firm until Trevor took his last breath. Meanwhile, Hazel grabbed some clothes from Trevor and passed them to Colin, who dressed the body before placing it in his car and driving away. Hazel then set about burning the hose, cleaning the room, and opening the windows to clear the air. She waited for Colin to call her with instructions on what to tell the police this time. Colin drove to the apartment that once belonged to his father-in-law on the Cliff Terraces in Castle Rock, parking the car in the open lot. There, he executed the final stage of his elaborate plan, seating Trevor's body in the driver's seat. However, since Trevor was taller and the seat had not been adjusted, Colin could not fit both of his legs inside, forcing him to leave one hanging out to prevent the door from closing completely. Colin left Leslie in the trunk of the car, surrounding her with family photographs and the letter she had written during a previous suicide attempt. He connected a cassette player to a set of headphones and placed them on her, turning on the device to play religious music. All this he did while wearing gloves, careful not to leave any fingerprints at the scene. As a final touch, he connected a vacuum cleaner hose to the exhaust pipe, inserting it through one of the car windows before starting the engine. Confident that the scene of the fatal pact would appear compelling, he rode his bicycle home. The following morning, Colin called Hazel to confirm that everything was done and to coordinate his alibi. He then contacted the church elders, pretending to know his wife's whereabouts and laying the groundwork for an investigation that would conclude Leslie and Trevor had taken their own lives willingly. The plan was a success. However, as previously mentioned, the lovers and accomplices did not maintain their relationship for long. Their commitment to keeping the secret of their crimes lasted nearly 2 decades. Once the horrifying plot was uncovered, it became clear that not only the two involved had remained silent, but someone else had kept the secret as well. In August or September 1998, a year after their second marriage, Colin was on the verge of confessing everything to the authorities. Instead, he chose to reveal his torturous secret to Hazel while they were home alone with their first child, whom she was feeding in the living room, while the other 6 children had gone out with friends. Colin confessed not only to the crime but also to having had an affair with another woman. He made an emphatic plea to Hazel to keep his secret for the sake of their children, insisting that she had waited 7 years and could wait just 1 more day. According to Hazel's later account, she felt frightened and trapped, having left her home in the United States. That night, she was visibly terrified and trembling as Colin urged her to calm down. Till the next day, when he left for work, Hazel began seeking ways to find help. She reached out to her community, making phone calls to gather information about what had happened. In an effort to find clarity, Hazel spoke to a friend at a fellowship in the Barn Church outside Bimmoney, where she and Colin were members. Without revealing too many details, she inquired about what she should do if Colin had done something wrong, emphasizing that such matters were meant to be resolved before the cross and should not be disclosed until it was time for Colin to confess the truth. Hazel reached out to her family in the United States, but due to her ambiguous approach, she received no concrete advice. The burden of this silence became overwhelming for her, triggering frequent arguments between her and Colin in 2008, ultimately leading to her decision to kick him out of their home. This decision was fueled by Colin's refusal to talk to the police about his actions. Hazel insisted that he turn himself in, especially after he had confessed to her about having another affair and losing all his money in a Japanese treasure scam. In January 2009, while they were in the kitchen, she was crying as she held their youngest child, pleading with Colin to put his affairs in order. She told him that the truth would set him free, that the Lord was giving him another chance, and that if he acted now, his life would not be forfeit. Colin remained silent, eventually repeating in a defeated tone that he could not do it. In response, Hazel contacted the church elders, asking them to come to their home to assist them. Meanwhile, Colin canceled his appointments for the next 2 days. The weight of grief and regret hung heavily on him. He felt that the failures of his investments and Matthew's tragic death were divine punishments for his sins. His religious convictions played a significant role in driving him toward confession. One of the elders took notes as Colin recounted everything he had done that fateful night in 1991. After speaking with the church authorities, Colin turned himself into the police, explaining that his actions stemmed from the immense difficulty of dealing with the situation. The police interrogations lasted several days, during which Colin detailed his plan and the sequence of events, even drawing diagrams of each crime scene. Both he and Hazel were arrested and charged with the murders of their ex-partners. At that time, Hazel had been married to David Stewart, a police superintendent, for 4 years. Despite the overwhelming evidence, both denied the charges, which was particularly peculiar in Colin's case, as his confession had prompted the revival of the accusations. This prompted the reopening of the investigation, leading authorities to search Castle Rock behind Colin's house on Glyph Street. The purpose of the search was only vaguely indicated. They specified that they were not looking for human remains. The shocking details that emerged about Colin extended far beyond the crimes involving Leslie and Trevor. On July 5, 2010, he faced charges for 17 counts of sexual abuse against 6 women. These alleged incidents took place in his dental office over the last decade, from 1998 to 2008. Colin pleaded guilty to only 3 of these incidents, which involved 3 separate patients during surgeries conducted between July and December 2008. He denied the remaining offenses. On November 18, 2010, Colin recanted his plea of innocence, admitting his guilt in the double murder of his wife. The trial began just days later at the Belfast Crown Court, lasting less than a month. On December 3, 2010, Colin was sentenced to a minimum of 21 years in prison. Proceedings against Hazel commenced on February 7, 2011, the day on which the jury, comprising 9 men and 3 women, was sworn in at the Crown Court. The prosecution's main argument contended that Hazel had played an active role in the criminal scheme for selfish motives. The Crown asserted that she had entered the agreement willingly and had assisted Colin in taking her husband's life, as well as in the subsequent cover-up. In contrast, Hazel's defense described her as a soft, weak, and vulnerable woman, portraying her as an easy target for Colin, whom they characterized as obsessive, calculating, controlling, and manipulative. It was revealed that during the interrogations following her arrest in January 2009, Hazel changed her account of the events a total of 3 times. The prosecution's star witness was Colin himself, who testified for 4 consecutive days starting on February 14, 2011. According to him, Hazel had never believed they would successfully cover up the crime. He claimed she considered the plan to be crazy and opposed it not because she found it morally reprehensible, but because she feared being discovered, even stating that she would take her own life if caught. As for Colin, Hazel, Paul Ramsey's advocate, argued that his primary motivation for committing the heinous crime was the opportunity to collect a substantial sum of money that would alleviate all his financial troubles. The dentist was found to have amassed $414,000, equivalent to approximately $660,000 at the time. This amount was acquired through inheritance from his wife's will, his life insurance, a deferred insurance payment, and cash from his father-in-law's estate. When cross-examined on the stand, Colin claimed he had received only slightly more than half of that total. In an effort to clarify that he had intended to eliminate his wife for some time, he admitted seeing alive while she was in the bathtub, revealing that this occurred a month prior to the crime. He acknowledged that, in the months leading up to the incident, he had been seeking a way out from Leslie's alleged control over him. Hazel's defense confronted him about these statements, particularly those made during a psychiatric examination in which he described Leslie as a poor mother and accused her of excessive drinking. On February 17th, the last day of Colin's testimony, he maintained that he was not a monster, asserting that Hazel had agreed to the plan and that nothing could have been executed without her cooperation. He emphasized that the psychiatric examiner had not objected to his presence during the hearings. 4 days later, the jury listened to the first of 15 recorded interrogations Hazel had with investigators when she was apprehended. On the tape, she expressed a desire to be lifeless when questioned about the double murder. In another recording, she spoke of Colin's apparent habit of administering nitrous oxide laughing gas before engaging in sexual acts in his dental chair. She voiced her fears about him potentially administering too high a dose, claiming that she understood his intentions, likely alluding to rendering her unconscious or incapacitated. A crucial witness was Colin's psychiatric evaluator, Dr. Helen Harbison, who determined that he exhibited signs of psychopathy. She referred to the sexual abuse allegations against him and characterized his use of laughing gas on Hazel as an experiment to see if he could subdue her. Colin had admitted to using not only nitrous oxide, but also injections in his perverted experiments, justifying his actions by claiming he administered the drugs to relieve Hazel's guilt for continuing their encounters even after the double murder. In another taped interrogation on February 23rd, Hazel was heard in tears, expressing that the biggest mistake of her life had been meeting Colin and that she had paid a heavy price for it. She apologized to Trevor's family, stating she couldn't fathom the pain of losing a child. Hazel lamented that her past had ruined her life with her husband and children. She acknowledged her involvement in Colin's plan, but insisted that she had not wanted to be part of it. During this interrogation, she detailed how she disposed of the evidence and admitted that on the night of the murder, she had suggested to her husband that he take a sleeping pill. On February 24th, her legal representative announced that Hazel would not testify directly in court. The defense argued that she could not have voluntarily participated in the crime, portraying Colin as someone who considered her weak, vulnerable, and easy to control. They emphasized his financial problems as the sole motivation for his actions. Conversely, the prosecution reiterated that Hazel had indeed participated in Colin's plans, motivated by her desire to prolong their relationship. On March 1st, 2011, On Hazel's 48th birthday, Judge Anthony addressed the jury, acknowledging the significant public attention the case had received. He reminded them to ignore any outside influences and to base their decision solely on the evidence presented. The magistrate emphasized that the critical question was whether Colin and Hazel had acted in concert. The following day, on March 2, 2011, after 2 hours of deliberation, the jury announced its verdict. Hazel was found guilty of double murder alongside Colin. Lisa, Hazel's daughter, began to cry, lamenting that it was unfair for the sins of the father to affect her mother. And after the verdict was announced, Chris Clark, a family member, expressed that they found comfort in knowing that those involved in the crime had been held accountable. Trevor's brother, Gordon, remarked that it was a day of mixed emotions for the Buccaneer family. Although Gordon Buccaneer was pleased that justice had been served for Trevor, the Buccaneer family experienced mixed emotions, recognizing that nothing could bring his brother back. Above all, he valued knowing the true nature of the tragedy. Detective Superintendent Raymond Murray, who led the new investigation, remarked on the emotional turmoil the case had inflicted on all those present in court. In his remarks to the media, he pointed out that the original inquiry in 1991 occurred during a period of severe internal conflict in the country, which affected the police's effectiveness. However, he expressed frustration over the significant delay in reaching a resolution to the case. 2 weeks later, on March 16th, the sentencing hearing was held, during which Hazel was sentenced to a minimum of 18 years in prison. The next day, Lauren, Colin's daughter, shared with the media that throughout the trial, she had been looking across the courtroom at the defendants' children, Andrew, 26, and Lisa, 28. She felt a great deal of empathy for them, recalling their close relationship as children. Lauren and her brother Daniel coped with the truth about their father in different ways. Lauren took the most drastic step by cutting off all contact with Colin and even referred to him by his first name. The situation was particularly traumatic for Daniel, who had been just 2 years old when he lost his mother, and Lauren, who was 4 at the time of the incident. Although she was horrified by her father's actions, she still loved him as a father and believed that he would eventually repent. Lauren struggled to accept her mother's decision to leave them, recalling her as a loving woman and thinking of her every day. Regardless of how they managed their feelings, it was evident that the loss of their mother marked them forever. They had to grapple not only with the pain of her departure, but also with the harsh truth of what had transpired, which forced them to reevaluate their understanding of the events surrounding their family's tragedy. On March 3, 2011, it was reported that Leslie's brother, Chris, suspected that Colin might also have been responsible for their father Henry's death, which occurred just 12 days before the double murder. Although the police aimed to investigate this possibility, their ability to do so was hindered by the fact that Leslie and Chris had cremated their father at Colin's insistence. Chris believed that if Colin had indeed taken his father's life, it would have been for the same cold, economic calculation that motivated him to eliminate his wife, given the substantial amount of money he ultimately stood to gain. Reevaluating the events surrounding Colin and Hazel's sentencing, which came 20 years after the incidents in question, naturally raised questions about the quality of the investigation conducted at that time. It seemed implausible that it was ever believed that Leslie and Trevor had willingly entered into a suicide pact, especially considering their deep devotion to each other and the infidelity of their respective partners. In April 2011, Trevor Gordon, Trevor's brother, wrote to Coroner John Leckie, requesting an inquest into both Trevor's and Leslie's roles in the tragic events. In his correspondence with the Attorney General for Northern Ireland, John Larkin, the Attorney General formally acknowledged that Trevor and Leslie had been victims of a crime and had not taken their own lives. On Wednesday, May 4, 2011, a hearing was held to determine whether the requested inquiry would proceed. During this hearing, Gordon and Lauren sought public rectification regarding the misconceptions surrounding their families and the tragic deaths. The coroner announced that an inquest would be conducted before the end of June. Subsequently, on May 25th of the same year, Colin was found guilty of numerous charges of sexual abuse for which he was also on trial. Judge Corin Pout concluded that the dentist had betrayed the trust and confidence placed in him. The dentist had betrayed the trust of his clients, and for these offenses, he was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison, to be served concurrently with his sentences for the double homicide. Meanwhile, Kyle divorced Colin and relocated to Fort Myers, Florida, where her family resided, settling there with her 7 children. Colin was disappointed that she did not stay to support him, as he had expected her to visit him in jail and bring the children to see him. However, it was revealed that Kai had also come under investigation due to her prolonged silence about the crimes. Ultimately, the Public Prosecution Service of Northern Ireland announced that it would not press charges against her for lack of evidence. This decision may have been influenced by Colin's refusal to testify against Kai. He confided to those close to him that, without her support, he would not have had the courage to undergo the entire legal process in 2011. Colin declared bankruptcy due to his tax debts and was forced to sell his house for less than its actual value of $300,000, which was approximately $80,000, in order to pay off creditors. He also lost the right to receive $590,000, equivalent to about $743,000, in pension benefits from the Public Health Service as part of the sanctions following his convictions for sexual assault. On August 19, 2011, a documentary titled The Perfect Girl was produced, focusing on the case from the perspective of Hazel's family, particularly her husband's. In the documentary, David expressed skepticism regarding the notion that Hazel had played an active role in the crime, arguing that she had only collaborated out of fear and manipulation by Colin, not of her own volition. The changes in Hazel's statements throughout her interrogations were attributed to the police exhausting her, effectively coercing her. On December 6, 2011, the police ombudsman for Northern Ireland published a statutory report on the coroner's inquest held in 1991 into the deaths of Trevor and Leslie. This report found that the original police investigation had been profoundly flawed due to the fatal pact hypothesis. This flawed premise led to a failure to collect vital evidence, such as fingerprints, and the vacuum cleaner hose was not tested. Additionally, there was no documentation of the scene, and no sketches or measurements were made. Numerous anomalies should have raised doubts among investigators, including the fact that Trevor's leg was missing from the body and was sticking out of the car door, while the driver's side window was open. This made the theory of fatal exhaust fume intoxication implausible. Other inconsistencies included family photos of Trevor found at the scene that were turned upside down from Leslie's perspective, further questioning the credibility of the alleged method of fatal exhaust poisoning. Additionally, Leslie was not wearing her shoes correctly, and the driver's seat was positioned awkwardly for a tall man like Trevor, which is why his leg could not fit inside the seat. The strange positioning of the bodies was a significant detail. If the victims had indeed made a pact, it was assumed they would have wanted to die together. Therefore, it was perplexing that only Trevor was found inside the vehicle while Leslie was not beside him. In summary, the report indicated that all these elements out of place should have served as clear signals to the original investigators that they were confronting a crime scene. Another notable detail was that the testimonies provided by Colin and Hazel were never adequately scrutinized. The investigation was riddled with contradictions and lies, and crucial information from a witness who claimed that Colin was administering drugs to Leslie, who was experiencing financial difficulties, was ignored. This witness also reported that Colin had recently placed a live wire into the bathtub while she was in it. The original investigation demonstrated a distinct lack of open-mindedness and leadership. In light of these findings, the Police Service of Northern Ireland issued an official statement acknowledging its failings and apologizing to the relatives of Leslie and Trevor, who expressed profound sadness and shock at how poorly their case was handled. Around this time, Colin attempted to appeal his conviction to the High Court but was unsuccessful. In 2013, he assembled a new legal team led by attorney Kevin Winters, who petitioned the Criminal Cases Review Commission to investigate whether a miscarriage of justice had occurred. The case garnered extensive media coverage in both Northern Ireland and the UK, leading to much speculation about the motivations of the two defendants, including portrayals of a femme fatale. However, husband and children vehemently disagreed with this depiction, defending her character against accusations of being a soulless criminal. In 2011, journalist Der Henderson published a book about the crime entitled Let This Be Your Secret, which served as the foundation for a 2016 miniseries titled The Secret. Beyond the intrigue surrounding Colin Howell and Hazel Stewart due to the peculiarities of their case and its outcome, it also serves as a sobering reminder of the destructive power of lies and the immense damage they can inflict on entire families when a skilled deceiver encounters individuals willing to believe them. Well, dear audience, this concludes our investigation. What do you think of today's case? We would love to hear your comments on today's case, as your opinions are very important to us. Remember to express yourself with the utmost respect for both the victims and other viewers, as well as for us who will be reading your comments. Before you go, please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video if you think someone you know might be interested in it. See you until the next criminal investigation. Goodbye.